My name is Sarah Bennett, and I was 34 the year my parents taught me exactly how much I was worth to them. I was standing in a cemetery, mud on my boots, one fresh grave in front of me, when my phone started buzzing in my coat pocket. My husband Mark was in that grave. He was 38. My parents and my brother hadn't come. They called it a trivial event not worth rearranging a cruise for, and boarded a ship out of Miami the very next morning. 5 days after I buried my husband, my mother called, not to grieve with me, but to ask me for $40,000. And what she said next is the reason I will never call her mom again. Welcome back to Success Wisdom Stories, where ordinary women face impossible families and answer with quiet strength instead of noise. If a story ever made you feel a little less alone, you're in the right place. So pull up a chair, drop a comment, and stick around, because this one starts at the worst week of my life and ends somewhere I never expected. These days I wake up at 5. The house is quiet behind me, and I don't turn on the kitchen light anymore because there's nobody in there to see it except my son. The first thing I touch every morning is a hard hat hanging by the back door. Mark's hard hat, the yellow paint chipped on one side from a fall he had years before I knew him. I run the company now. Bennett Roofing and Construction, 12 guys, 3 trucks, a waiting list that's 3 weeks long in good weather. Mark built it from nothing, one ladder and one used truck, and a stubbornness that used to drive me crazy. I used to tease him about the way he'd climb a roof in weather no sane man would touch. He used to tease me right back, because I was the one doing the books, the permits, the client calls, while everybody assumed I was just the wife who answered the phone. He loved watching some new client realize the woman with the clipboard was the one who actually ran the place. Caleb is 7. He has his father's stubborn jaw and his father's habit of asking why 3 times in a row until he actually understands something instead of just nodding along. He was at his grandmother's, my mother-in-law's, the night the storm came through, which is the only reason I still have him at all. I think about that a lot. How a few miles and a babysitting favor are the only reason I'm not burying 2 people instead of 1. People think grief is loud. Mostly it's 1,000 small absences. Mark's boots are still by the garage door. I haven't moved them. I tell myself I will, and then another morning comes, and I don't. 11 months ago, I still had a husband to come home to. I want to tell you how I lost him. But first I have to tell you how the people who share my blood decided they had somewhere better to be. It was the worst storm our county had seen in a decade, a line of supercells that rolled through in May with almost no warning, hail the size of golf balls and wind that peeled siding off houses 2 streets over. Mark was finishing a roof on the Hendersons' place that afternoon, an older couple who'd been putting off the repair for months and finally caught a break in his schedule. He saw the sky turning green and told his crew to get down and get clear. He stayed up another 10 minutes to secure a tarp over the section they'd opened, because he couldn't stand the thought of rain pouring straight into that old couple's attic. The wind caught him coming down the ladder. He fell 2 stories onto the Hendersons' patio. He was gone before the ambulance made it out of town. I'm not going to describe the rest. Some things aren't for telling, and Mark deserves better than to be a sad detail in a story. What I'll tell you is that I drove to that hospital not knowing yet, going through every version of normal in my head, and I got there to a chaplain waiting in the hallway, which is how you know before anyone says a word. And the first call I made, before I could even get the words all the way out, was to my mother. I thought, of everyone on this earth, she would come. My mother's first question was whether the funeral could be pushed back a week and a half. I remember sitting on my kitchen floor with the phone against my ear, certain I'd misheard her. She and my father had a cruise booked, a 10-day trip out of Miami with my brother Kyle and his wife Brittany, planned since the fall, paid in full, non-refundable. I told her my husband was dead. She told me she understood, in the exact tone you'd use with a coworker who'd missed a deadline. Then Brittany took over the family group chat because Brittany always takes over. She wrote that of course everyone was devastated, but the cabin deposits were gone if they canceled, and the kids had been counting down the days, and surely I wouldn't want everyone to lose the whole trip over what she actually typed out, word for word. For the whole family to read, a trivial event not worth losing a vacation over. A trivial event. My husband's funeral. My mother's reply 2 minutes later was a thumbs up and the word agreed. Nobody asked how Mark died. Nobody asked if I was eating or if Caleb understood what had happened or whether I was sleeping alone in a house that still smelled like his coffee. They asked which dates worked better for everyone's calendar. I stopped asking. I told them the service would be Saturday, with or without them, and then I hung up and I didn't call again. That was the first time in my life I understood something cold and clean about the people who raised me. They were never going to choose me. They never had. And the strange thing was, knowing it didn't break me. It freed up my hands for what came next. The front pew at a funeral is supposed to be for family. At Mark's service, that pew sat empty, and I chose to sit in the second row with everyone else because the people in the second row had actually shown up. Mark's whole crew came in their work boots, 12 grown men crying in a church. The Hendersons came, the couple whose roof he died finishing, and the old man held my hand through the entire service and couldn't stop apologizing for something that was never his fault. Caleb's whole second-grade class sent cards. My mother-in-law sat beside me the entire time, holding both my hands like she could keep me from floating away. My parents were on a boat somewhere off the coast of Mexico. My brother was on a boat. Their seats stayed empty while 100 working people packed that church to say goodbye to a roofer who never once turned away a client who couldn't pay full price. I gave the eulogy myself. I didn't trust my voice to anyone else's hands. I said Mark climbed a roof in a storm to keep an old woman's attic dry. I said he taught our son to whistle before he taught him to tie his shoes. I said he was the best thing I ever built alongside, and the only thing I couldn't keep. I didn't mention the empty pew. I didn't have to. Every person in that room could see it. Afterward, Mark's old business partner, a man named Walt who'd known him since they were apprentices together, walked me to my car and said the only honest thing anyone said to me that whole month. "Sarah," he said, "they're not coming back to you, not really. Plan your life like that's true." I buried my husband with the people who actually showed up, and as I stood by the fresh grave, mud under my boots, the phone in my coat started buzzing. My mother's name, somewhere off the coast of Cozumel. I let it ring out into the wet grass, and I had no idea yet what she was about to ask me for. 5 days later, I picked up out of pure exhaustion, more than anything else. There was no "how are you?" There was no "I'm sorry I missed it." There was just wind and some kind of ship announcement in the background, and my mother's voice going straight to business, the way you'd call about a late invoice. "Sarah, we need to talk about money." I sat down at the kitchen table. I asked what money. She said the 40,000. Her tone said I should already know. Then she told me Kyle's restaurant was about to lose its lease, that the bank was calling the loan, that the family needed to pull together, that I had to see the bigger picture. And when I didn't answer fast enough, she said the line I will hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. "We can always make more money, Sarah. We can't make more family." She said that to the daughter whose husband was in the ground because they wouldn't come home for him. She said it from a cruise ship with sunscreen probably still on her arms, asking me for $40,000 to bail out the son who'd been on that same boat while I picked out a casket. I held the phone away from my face and looked at Mark's boots by the garage door. I thought about how a person can take the most beautiful word in the language, family, and use it like a crowbar to pry money out of someone they just abandoned. I came very close to laughing and very close to something a lot worse. Instead, I asked her one quiet question. "What $40,000 do you think is yours?" There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that tells you somebody has already decided what they're owed and just hasn't said it out loud yet. Here's the 40,000. 6 years ago, before any of this, Mark wanted to stop subcontracting for other companies and start his own crew. A used truck, a trailer, real equipment. It ran about $100,000 to get going properly. We'd saved most of it, but we needed a bank loan to cover the gap, and the lender looked at our down payment and asked where 40,000 of it came from, because that's what lenders always ask. It had come from my parents 2 Christmases earlier, handed to us in front of Kyle at a moment when they were feeling generous and important, called a gift toward our future. The bank doesn't take your word for that. When part of a down payment comes from relatives, the lender makes the relatives sign a letter. A real document. It says the money is a true gift, no repayment expected, not a loan in any form. I drove that paperwork to my parents' house myself, sat at their kitchen table, and watched both of them sign it so Mark could buy his first real truck. Then I filed it away with the loan documents and forgot it existed, the way you forget something you'll never need until the day you need it more than anything you own. My mother had forgotten it too, or decided it didn't count anymore, because now, with Kyle drowning and my whole life in a casket, she'd reclassified that gift in her head. It wasn't a gift anymore. It was an investment, and an investment, she'd decided, was something a family could demand back whenever it pleased. She had no idea what was sitting in my filing cabinet. Kyle called the next day to finish what my mother started. My brother is 31 and has spent his whole life being the favorite, which mostly meant being the one our parents bankrolled. He'd opened a restaurant 2 years back with money he didn't really have, and now the lease and the loans were eating him alive, and the dining room sat half empty on a Friday night. He didn't ask about Mark. He led with the restaurant, then with family loyalty, then with the part that told me everything. "Look, Sarah," he said, "you're alone now anyway. What do you even need that kind of money for?" I let that sit in the air. "You're alone now," as if my husband were a line item they'd helpfully zeroed out for me, as if grief came with a refund. Then Brittany texted, because Brittany cannot let a silence stand. She wrote that family money was a shared pool, that I'd taken from the pool once, and it was someone else's turn now, and that frankly my attitude was hurting everyone. A shared pool. I'd paid my parents back 100 different ways over the years, but you can't repay people who keep moving the line. The worst part wasn't the asking. It was finding out from my cousin Jess a week later that they'd already been telling the whole extended family their version, that poor Kyle was struggling and selfish Sarah, sitting on her dead husband's company, wouldn't lift a finger to help her own blood. They'd built the story before I'd even said no. They just needed me to play the villain in it. I decided right then I wasn't going to argue with their story. I was going to outlast it. I want to tell you I never wavered. I'd be lying. I've been the one everybody leans on since I was a kid, the one who covered for Kyle's missed curfews, the one who smoothed things over so dinner wouldn't turn into a fight. So one night, about a week into the calls, I actually sat down with the company checkbook. 40,000 would gut our cash reserve right before the slow season, but it would make the phones stop ringing, and some exhausted animal part of me just wanted the noise to end. Walt caught me at it. He'd taken to stopping by, fixing things around the shop that didn't need fixing, sitting in Mark's old office chair so it wouldn't feel so empty. He saw the checkbook open on the table and he didn't yell. He just said, "You'd really write that, wouldn't you? You'd pay them to keep skipping your husband's funeral." And I put the pen down because he was right. I wasn't scared of being called ungrateful. I was just so used to being the one who fixed things that I'd nearly fixed the wrong one. If you've ever been the person everyone leans on and nobody catches, stay with me, because this is the exact part where I stopped carrying people who couldn't be bothered to stand at my husband's grave. Drop a comment if that's you and stick around, because what I did instead of writing that check is the whole reason I'm telling you this story. I capped the pen, closed the checkbook, and the next morning at 5, I did the one thing that's never let me down. I went to work. Going back to work meant facing every man who figured the company would fold without Mark on a ladder. A supplier I'd worked with for years suddenly had questions about whether we could keep our accounts current. A competitor started telling clients we might not last the season, a grieving widow running a roofing crew alone. They'd already counted me out. My hands shook on that steering wheel some mornings, and that shaking was sometimes the only thing keeping me upright, but I held on to that company like it was the last thing in the world that was actually mine, because it was. Then Denise found me. Denise had run the books for a regional contracting outfit for almost 30 years and had forgotten more about this business than half the men doubting me would ever learn. She took me to lunch, bought me a sandwich I didn't eat, and gave me the only piece of advice that mattered. "Honey," she said, "from here on out, people are either working with you or working against you. There's no third chair. Stop waiting for the doubters to come around. Make them irrelevant." So I did. I called every client who'd ever trusted Mark and told them the truth straight out. The woman with the clipboard was still running the place, the same as always, and the work was still getting done on time. I underbid nobody and outworked everybody. About 3 weeks into that, a contract came across my desk too big for 3 trucks, a property management company with 20 buildings needing new roofs over the next 2 years. Steady work, real money, the kind of account that builds a company for good. All I had to do was be brave enough to take it. To cover it, I needed a 4th truck fast, so I started clearing out Mark's old work van to trade it in. That van was his second office. He kept it spotless, oil changes logged to the day, one of Caleb's drawings taped above the visor. I sat in that driver's seat for an hour before I could touch anything. Then I started pulling his things out, gentle, like going through a sleeping man's pockets, his sunglasses, a thermos, a roll of shop towels, and down in the side pocket, under a folded set of blueprints, his job planner. Not the app the insurance company made him use. The old paper kind he kept anyway out of habit, 6 years of his handwriting filling every line. I held it and couldn't open it. It felt like opening his hands. I told myself I'd read it later, when I was stronger, and I set it on the passenger seat next to his thermos. But I'd already seen something as I picked it up. The very last page wasn't a job log. It was writing, more of it than an entry, his block letters filling the lines. He'd written something there before he died, and I hadn't known, and now it was sitting 2 feet away from me, waiting. I drove home with it on the seat like a passenger. I'll be honest, I was afraid of that page. Some part of me already knew that whatever Mark wrote there was going to change what I did next, and I wasn't sure I was ready to be changed. It took me 3 more days to open it. While that planner sat unopened on my kitchen table, my family went to work on my name. Brittany ran the campaign, because Brittany treats family like a marketing account. The texts came daily, reminders of everything my parents had done for me, a guilt trip dressed up as concern, asking if I'd gotten help for how bitter I'd become. She forwarded a photo of Kyle's kids with a caption about how they might lose the only life they'd known, as if their lease and my dead husband belonged on the same scale. My cousin Jess called and told me what was actually circulating, that I'd come into money and turned my back on the family, that grief had made me cruel, that my parents were heartbroken by my coldness. The same parents who'd been snorkeling while I picked out a casket. They'd flipped the whole story. In their telling, they were the wounded ones, and I was the villain who wouldn't help her struggling brother. For about a day, that made me sick, because a lie repeated by enough mouths starts to feel like weather, like something you just have to live under. Then it made me clear. They weren't going to stop on their own. People who rewrite the story to make themselves the victim never volunteer to put the pen down. Jess, to her credit, wasn't buying any of it. "I was at that funeral, Sarah," she told me. "I saw the empty pew. I'm not losing my mind. That was the first crack. One person in that family who'd looked at the same room I had and seen the truth of it. I didn't know yet how much I'd need her, but I filed her away next to the gift letter, next to the planner, in the growing folder of things that were going to matter. Jess called again on a Thursday, her voice lower than usual. The voice people use when they're telling you something they're not supposed to. "They're planning something," she said. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary was coming up, a big party at the country club, the whole extended family invited. I hadn't planned on going, but Jess had been at my aunt's kitchen table when my mother and Brittany mapped it out. They were going to corner me there, in front of everyone. My father was going to stand up during the toasts and make a family appeal, frame me as the daughter who wouldn't help her own brother in his hour of need. They figured I'd either fold under the pressure of 40 relatives watching or refuse and prove I was exactly the cold woman they'd been describing. Either way, they won. It was a trap with 2 exits, and both of them led where they wanted me to go. Just thought I should skip it, stay home, stay safe, not give them the stage. And for a minute, that's exactly what I planned to do. Then something in me went very still and very calm, the way it does on a ladder 40 feet up when the wind picks up and you stop being scared and just start working. They wanted an audience. 40 people gathered in one room to watch them put me in my place. The thing about an audience, though, is that it works both ways. They were building a stage to humiliate me on. I started thinking about what else you could do with a stage and a room full of witnesses, and the truth nobody had bothered to check. That night, I finally opened the last page of Mark's planner. I poured a coffee I didn't drink and sat at the table and turned to the back, and there it was, his block handwriting, dated the week before he died. It wasn't a love letter. Mark wasn't a love letter man. It was a list, titled the way he titled everything, plain and direct. Things we're going to do. Pay off the truck loan early. Buy the lot next to the shop. Put Caleb's name on the door someday, so he grows up knowing his mama built something real. He'd already picked the name. Bennett and Son. The company we always joked about and never quite started. He'd written it down for the boy who carried his father's toolbox around the yard before he could properly lift it, so he'd grow up watching his mother run something with his own name eventually on it. I sat there a long time. Then I went out to the van the next morning and reached up to the visor, where I knew Caleb's drawing had been writing for 2 years, and unclipped it. A crayon picture, a yellow house with a tall ladder leaning against it, a stick figure in a hard hat, his careful kindergarten letters underneath, Daddy's roof. I'd seen it 100 times and never really seen it. They'd called his funeral a trivial event. They'd called my whole life a line item. And I was about to make that little boy's name worth more than every cruise they'd ever taken. I didn't decide it in a rush of anger. I decided it the way you decide to take a steep pitch in a lower gear on purpose, with both eyes open. The next week, I filed the paperwork. The company stopped being Bennett Roofing and Construction. It became Bennett and Son. I kept the and Son. He was still here, but the name wasn't really about that anymore. It was about a promise his father wrote down and never got to keep saying out loud. Naming the company changed something in how I moved. I wasn't grieving and waiting for the storm to pass anymore. I had a thing to build and a son's name going up on the side of every truck and people who'd lied about both of us. I decided I would go to the anniversary party, not to fight. I've never won anything by being the loudest person in a room, and I wasn't about to start at my parents' country club. I'd go for one reason, to put the truth on the table in front of every witness they'd gathered, and let it sit there where they couldn't text it away or spin it on a phone call. But truth in that family was never enough by itself. They'd been bending it my whole life. I needed something they couldn't argue with, something with their own signatures on it. I remembered the gift letter, filed away with the loan paperwork, both their signatures swearing in plain language that the $40,000 was a gift, not a loan. The trouble was I wasn't sure my copy was clean enough to hold up to a room full of doubters, and I knew the original lived in the bank's loan file. If I was going to set that page down in front of 40 people, it had to be official, certified, undeniable. So I did the unglamorous thing. I called the bank and asked how a borrower requests a certified copy from her own closed loan file. The woman on the phone said it would take a few days and a small fee. A few days and a small fee. That was the entire price of the thing that was about to turn their faces to paper. I marked the date of the party on my calendar and started counting down, not in dread this time, in readiness. The loan officer who pulled my file was younger than the man who'd closed it years earlier, but he found it. I sat across his desk while he flipped through old paperwork and slid one page across to me, and there they were, my mother's signature, my father's signature, and above them, the language banks use so there's never any doubt. The funds represent a gift. No repayment is expected. This is not a loan in any form. Both of them had signed it right at their own kitchen table while I watched. I had him make a certified copy, stamped and dated, and drove it home flat on the passenger seat like it might blow away. The whole drive, I kept hearing Kyle, "You're alone now, Sarah. What do you even need it for?" I knew exactly what I needed it for. Not the money. I never wanted that 40,000 back. I needed the one page that proved which of us had been telling the truth, and I needed it in front of the people they'd lied to. If anyone in your life has ever made you doubt what you plainly remember, here's what 6 years of running a business has taught me. Write it down, keep the page, file the proof. Subscribe, because the next part is the one I've been waiting 11 months for. I put the certified copy in a plain folder, set it by the door next to my keys, and waited for the party. While I waited, the company kept growing. I took that property management contract, hired 2 more crews to cover it, painted the trucks deep forest green with the name in clean white letters down both doors. Bennett and Son, and underneath, small, where you'd only notice if you looked, Caleb's crayon house with the ladder, traced exact from his drawing. The first time I saw all 4 trucks lined up at the yard with his artwork on the doors, I had to sit in my own truck a while before I could drive home. The supplier who'd questioned our credit upgraded our account without me asking. The competitor who said I wouldn't last the season started referring overflow work my way. Funny how fast she'll never make it turns into we always believed in her, once the trucks are full and the invoices clear. I didn't gloat. I just remembered. Word traveled the way it does in a small town, straight to my family. Suddenly the daughter, who was alone now and didn't need their money, was running a real company with her son's name on 4 trucks. They could smell it. The same people who'd skipped the funeral started liking my posts. My mother sent a single warm text, the first kind thing in months. "So proud of what you've built, honey. So proud of the thing they'd tried to pull $40,000 out of." I didn't answer. I just made sure that certified copy was still sitting by the door. The closer the party got, the louder my mother's version got. She'd stopped expecting the check and started protecting her story instead, which mattered more to her than the money ever had. At church, at her bridge club, at her sister's table, she told anyone who'd hold still that I'd abandoned the family, that success had gone to my head, that I'd let one tragedy, her words, one tragedy, turn me bitter against my own blood. And she kept reaching for that same line she'd used to ask for the money, except now she aimed it straight at me. "We can't make more family," she'd say, shaking her head, sorrowful, as if I were the one who'd boarded a cruise ship while her son-in-law went into the ground. I heard most of this from Jess, who'd appointed herself my spy and my friend in the same breath, and Jess did something I'll never forget. She started quietly telling people the truth. Not arguing, not making scenes, just, when somebody repeated my mother's version at the grocery store, Jess would say, mild as milk, "That's strange, because I was at that funeral and your folks weren't. They were somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico." I have the dates. And she did have the dates. People started doing the math. A few of them went quiet about it, the way you do when a story you've been repeating turns out to be the opposite of true. The ground was shifting under my mother's feet, and she didn't feel it yet. She thought she was walking into her anniversary party to put her daughter in her place. She had no idea the place had already moved. The thing that really cracked it open was a photograph. My mother, like a lot of people her age, had discovered she loved posting pictures online and hated understanding how the dates worked. Somewhere in her feed from that spring was a sunny shot of all of them on the ship's deck, drinks in hand, Kyle's kids grinning behind sunglasses, the caption something about making memories. The timestamp was the day after Mark went into the ground. Just found it. She didn't even have to say anything cruel. She just put that photo next to the funeral date, both plain as day, and let people look. A cocktail photo dated the morning after a man's burial. You can spin a lot of things with a phone call. You cannot spin a timestamp. The relatives who'd been nodding along to my mother's story now had a date in one hand and a date in the other, and the gap between them was an ocean and a fresh grave. Some of them came to me afterward, awkward and sorry, saying they hadn't known, saying my mother had told them I'd never even invited them, which was its own lie. I didn't rub anyone's face in it. I just said gently that the service had been open to anyone who wanted to come, and that I'd been grateful for the ones who did. Cool and even, save the heat for the people who actually deserve to feel it. That photo had done in one timestamp what I'd never have managed with 100 angry words. It turned the witnesses my parents were gathering into witnesses for me. And the party was 4 days out. 4 days out, I did something I hadn't been able to make myself do in 11 months. I drove out to the lake where Mark used to take Caleb fishing on Sunday mornings while I caught up on sleep. I went at dawn, when the water goes flat and silver and still. I sat on the bank with my coffee and talked to him a while. I told him about the trucks with Caleb's drawing on the doors. I told him I'd named the company. I told him what I was about to do, and I asked out loud whether I was doing it for the right reason. Sitting there in the quiet, I got my answer. I didn't want my parents ruined. I didn't want Kyle's kids to lose their home. I'm not built to enjoy other people's wreckage, even theirs. What I wanted was simpler and harder. I wanted it on the record. I wanted 40 people to know what was true, so the next time my mother called my husband's death a trivial event, there'd be a room full of people who knew better. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth to stop being optional. Turns out for people like my family, those two things feel exactly the same. And I'd stopped being responsible for how the truth made them feel. The night before the party, Walt came by. He'd heard what was coming, the way everyone in a small town eventually hears everything, and he offered to stand beside me in that room, to back me up, to make sure I wasn't alone against all of them. It was a good and loving offer, and I told him no. Not because I didn't want him there, but because I'd finally understood I didn't need a shield. A shield is for somebody who's about to lose. I wasn't going in to lose. I was going in with the truth, one certified page, and the calmest hands I'd had in a year. If I bring backup, I told him, it looks like a fight, and I'm not going to fight them. I'm going to tell 40 people something true, and then I'm going to leave. He looked at me a long moment and nodded the way he had at the funeral, like a man who knew when to hold a fence post steady and when to let it stand on its own. Mark would be proud of you, he said. I took that as the gift it was. That night I laid out plain, dark clothes for the next day, nothing fancy, because I wasn't dressing to win anybody over. I set the certified copy in my coat pocket, one folded page, and put the coat by the door. 40 years of marriage, $40,000 they wanted back, and I was bringing exactly one page to the party. I slept better that night than I had since the funeral. When you finally know what you're going to do, fear has nowhere left to live. The country club ballroom smelled like prime rib and 40 years of anniversary flowers. They'd done it up nice, a long table with a white cloth, a sheet cake printed with my parents' wedding photo, a banner in gold letters, 40 years, about 40 relatives in the room, which I noted with some grim amusement. 40 years, $40,000, 40 people to watch. My mother saw me come in and her face did a complicated thing, surprise and triumph at once, because she hadn't been sure I'd show, and now that I had, she figured I'd walked straight into her trap. Brittany air-kissed me. Call wouldn't meet my eyes. I got a plate of cake I didn't eat, and I waited, because I knew what was coming. A calm settles over you when you're the only person in the room who knows the script. They got through the toasts. Then my father stood up, tapped his fork against his glass, and the room went quiet for him. I watched him decide to do it in front of everyone. He thanked them all for coming, talked about family, about sticking together, about how when times got hard a family was supposed to step up. Then he turned, slow and deliberate, to me. Some of us, he said, have been blessed and have forgotten where the blessing came from. We helped Sarah when she had nothing, $40,000, and now that she's doing well, she won't lift a finger for her own brother. A murmur went through the room. Brittany, right on cue, added her line, sweet as poison, just loud enough for everyone to catch. It's a shame, really. We even missed that funeral for family, and this is the thanks we get. A trivial event, she said again, in different words, in front of all of them. The room turned to look at me. My mother sat with her hands folded, certain she'd already won. I set down my paper plate and stood up. I didn't raise my voice, and that's the first thing I want you to know, because it's the thing that mattered most. 40 people were braced for a scene, and I gave them quiet instead. Quiet in a loud room is the loudest thing there is. Dad, I said, you're right that you gave us $40,000. Let's talk about that. But first, since Brittany brought it up, let's talk about the funeral. I reached into my coat and took out a single sheet of paper, unfolded it slow, and laid it flat on the white tablecloth next to the wedding cake. A printed timeline, plain dates. This is the day my husband was buried, I said, and pointed. And this, I moved my finger an inch, is the date on the photo Mom posted from the ship. 1 day later. Drinks in the sun, making memories, the caption said. I looked up. You didn't miss the funeral for family. You skipped my husband's funeral for a vacation, and then you came home and asked the grieving widow for $40,000. The room had gone very still. My father's mouth opened and shut. My mother's certainty drained out of her face like water out of a sink. Then Carl did what loud people always do when the quiet person won't flinch. He came up out of his chair, red in the face, shouting that I was twisting things, that the restaurant was about to fold, that I owed this family, that I was bitter and alone and selfish, the whole script at full volume in a country club ballroom. I let him finish. When he ran out of breath, I reached into my coat one more time and took out the second page, the certified copy, and set it down next to the timeline, sliding it across the cloth toward my father. You both signed this, I said, 6 years ago, at your own kitchen table. It's the gift letter the bank required. It says, in your own signatures, that the $40,000 was a gift. No repayment expected. Not a loan in any form. I let that sit. So a demand to pay it back as a debt doesn't hold up. You can ask me for money. You can't bill me for a gift you swore wasn't one. Then I said the 3 things I'd come to say, and I said them gently, because they didn't need any force behind them. To Brittany, you taught me which events are worth attending. I'll remember that the rest of my life. To my mother, who'd gone white, you told me we can't make more family. You were right. So I've stopped trying to make one out of you. And to Kyle, still standing there, fists open now, you asked what I even needed that money for. I needed it to bury my husband. You needed a cruise. Nobody spoke. Then a chair scraped at the back of the room and Jess stood up. Clear as a bell, she said. I was at that funeral. Everything she just said is true. I have the dates. After Jess, The room turned the way a loaded truck turns, slow and then all at once. An aunt I'd barely spoken to in years reached over and quietly slid the gift letter so more people could read it. Folks who'd come ready to judge the cold, ungrateful daughter were now looking at a timeline and 2 signatures and a vacation photo, doing the only honest thing left, which was to look ashamed of what they'd believed. My mother said my name once, Sarah, like a question, like she still thought there was a version of this where I sat back down and we had cake. There wasn't. Call ran out of steam and just stood there, and for 1 second I saw it, the real thing under all the entitlement. He was terrified. He was about to lose the restaurant and maybe the house, and his kids would feel it, and he'd gambled the whole family on bullying me into covering it, and now the family was looking at him instead. Sarah, he said, quiet for the first time all night. I'm scared. And I believed him. That was the closest thing to honest any of them had given me in 11 months. I felt the old reflex twitch, the one that's covered for him since he was 12. But he still hadn't said he was sorry about Mark. Not his name, not that day, not the empty pew. Scared for himself, never sorry for me. So I folded my 2 pages back into my coat and said the truest thing I had left. I hope you figure it out, Kyle. I really do. But you're going to have to do it without me. Then I walked out into the parking lot, and the night air was clean and cold, and I could breathe. The story that I owed them $40,000 died in that ballroom and never came back. They could have asked me for help the way anybody can ask anybody. What they couldn't do, after their own signatures sat on that tablecloth, was keep calling it a debt I'd walked out on. You can't collect on a gift the giver swore was a gift. The relatives who'd been ready to chip in for Kyle quietly closed their checkbooks once they'd seen the dates. The restaurant closed that fall. I heard about it secondhand from Jess, with no feeling in my chest one way or the other. I went no contact with my parents and my brother, not with a dramatic letter, not with a blow-up. I just stopped picking up, and after a while they stopped calling, and the quiet that came in behind them was the most peaceful thing I'd felt in years. I kept the people who showed up. Walt comes by the shop most Fridays and still sits in Mark's old chair, and I've made my peace with that, because somebody good should sit there. Jess and I talk every week. Denise is semi-retired now, but still answers when I call with a business question. Bennett and Son runs 7 trucks today, all of them deep green, all of them with a small crayon house and a ladder painted on the doors, traced exact from a 7-year-old's drawing. People notice. Clients ask about it. And I get to say his name out loud, Mark, my husband. He built this, and Caleb gets to grow up watching his name on the side of every truck that drives down our highway. I finally moved his work boots off the garage floor this spring, not far, just to a shelf where I can still see them on my way out the door at 5. And on a Sunday not long ago, almost a year out, I drove to that lake at dawn with a handful of wildflowers and left them on the bank for the man who actually built me into who I am. The water didn't break me that morning either. It just held still, the way it does, and held me with it. I don't reach for my phone out there anymore. There's nobody on it I'm waiting to hear from. I've got the people who came when there was nothing in it for them, and I let go of the ones who only showed up when there was. That's the whole trick, it turns out. That's the entire thing. Family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the people who show up when there's nothing left to gain, and the ones who walk away the moment there is. That's my story. A funeral they called trivial. A cruise they couldn't cancel. And 1 page they signed and forgot. If someone keeps asking you to carry them while they skip your hardest days, let this be your sign to set the page down. You don't owe a debt you never signed for. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Tell me in the comments who actually showed up for you and hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.